Thank you all for being here this evening, or today, as the case may be, because it is midday here on the East Coast of the U.S. I have been focused really on assessment in the drama classroom for much of my work. I was a master's student 20 years ago, and I was first introduced to the work of Dorothy Heathcote and process drama and classroom drama and education. And at the time, everything was new and different and exciting. But also at the time, I was cast in a play that was called Assess, Putting the Pieces Together, which was a verbatim theater production where classroom teachers, administrators had been interviewed to find out what their thoughts and perceptions on assessment were. Whether they were drama teachers, maths teachers, didn't matter. But what did they know about and understand about assessment at the time? And that sort of planted a seed in my mind. And I had knowledge then that in the arts, there was some confusion, misunderstanding, et cetera, about what assessment might look like. And so I have constantly come back to, as a drama educator, how does assessment function in my classes? Now, as I work with pre-service drama teachers at NYU Steinhardt, and I'm training folks to go out into the field and work with young people, what are their needs in terms of adapting assessment models for their teaching. And I started teaching a class on assessment in the drama classroom 10 years ago. And that first year that I was teaching the class, I was having conversations with the graduate students. And I kept coming back to, I really wish there was a book that was on assessment in the drama classroom. And there isn't one. And well, now there will be, because I've written one and it's coming out later this year. So what I'm going to do in this presentation, apologies for the clarinet playing that's happening next door. But what I'm going to do in this presentation today is to share some of those ideas that are central to that text, but also to hear from you about what you know and understand about drama and assessment in drama in particular, and then also what you want to know, what you're curious about. And so we'll be moving through that information as we go. So let me share my screen. Okay, let me adjust this. And so there we are. All right, off we go. In terms of the agenda, we're going to start with some goal setting and hear a little bit about what folks are teaching. And then we'll sort of morph into some general guidance about assessment, which I'm calling Provocation Be Explicit. So I'll talk about that. And from there, then we have a couple of options for how we can proceed. Either we'll continue through this agenda as I have it laid out, which is to sort of deconstruct a sample drama lesson, or we can just move into sort of formalizing assessment practices and what that might look like. And we'll sort of make a decision about what's important for the folks who are in the room. And then we'll have a time for discussion and reflection at the end, but certainly we can have discussion as we go. I'm going to share with you some links. So let me put that in the chat. And what these links are, one of them is a link to a Google Doc that we'll be adding information into as we go. And then the other is just a link to this PowerPoint, if that is helpful for you as we're working. The first thing that we're going to do, though, is to do some goal setting for our own session here. So I'm going to ask you to view the KWL that we have, which is asking, what do we know about assessment in the drama classroom? And for this, I want you to consider facts, concepts, procedures, things, curiosities, I don't know what, things that are already in your mind that you know about assessment in the drama classroom. And so just in the Google document, you can just go in there, pick a bullet, and you can type directly into the document itself. If you're not able to access the document and you want to instead type some ideas in the chat, I can move them into the document for you. But K, what do we know about assessment in the drama classroom? Okay, John, I see what you have there. I'll add it. The way ORC 21 relates to intentions. Group assessment, sure. Okay, do we have different criteria for performance and process, maybe? So as ideas are coming up there, that I say I've been teaching a course on this here at NYU for 10 years. And over time, as I say, I lamented the fact that there isn't a text that's just on assessment. And so what material do we have access to that I could share with the students? And so certainly in many books that are written about drama instruction, drama curriculum, and the like. There often will be a section on assessment in the drama classroom. I'm looking right now at a book, Planning Process Drama by Pamela Bull and Brian Heath. And in their book, I think assessment gets 2 pages for what they have. In other folks' texts, sometimes the chapters can be quite involved and longer. And one of the challenges I've had over this decade of teaching was, trying to make a decision about what material was important for people to know and have access to. And it was every year I was giving them something different to read. That there was some new perspective that I had seen, or something that, upon reflection, seemed like it didn't cover the full scope of what I felt was necessary for my students. And so, since all of these materials exist in part, but none of them are really as fulsome as they might be, I knew that I needed to sort of take time to gather insight from my students, from the teachers that I work with, who are out working in the field, to gather a sense of what practices they were engaged in, what was meaningful for them, and also what they needed in order to have effective learning experiences for their students. So I'm going to move you into the W column here. You showed up to this session today. What is it that you want to know, or what are you hoping to find out about assessment? And so if we want to add some ideas into that middle column there, what are we interested in? Those of you who are present. Okay, there's a few more ideas that were in the chat, so I'm going to move those over into the document so that it's there for us. You can be adding things to what you want to know. All right. And so what do we have here? The ways in which teachers struggle to try to keep in line with outcomes in their work. Their penalty is a no penalty narrative construction, sure. It does not work with the one-size-fits method of school assessment and government policies. Therefore, it's undervalued by all stakeholders. Certainly a real problem and concern, not just with assessment in the drama classroom, but with drama as part of the curriculum as a whole. And sorting the performative and the enactive and the way they link. Absolutely. So what are things that you're hoping to learn, whether in this session or just generally in your work as you go forth? I know that we heard at the beginning, some folks are working on their dissertations. Folks are partnering sometimes with teachers and gathering data about the experience of assessment in the classroom, what that's like for teachers, but also what it's like for the young people. So what are some of the things that you're curious about and interested in exploring? How can assessment of drama be productive, constructive, and meaningful to students so that they do not feel like failures? Drama, in my experience, has provided such a non-judgmental way of working, particularly for marginalized youth. We can talk about that today. How can we reconcile an emphasis on process with assessment? We will talk about that today for sure. Danielle, I see what you have there. I want to gain evidence of how drama teachers include students within their assessment practice. Yeah, we'll start some of that today, I think. There are more ideas about it that I have, and they're addressed in the book. Okay, John, I see how to use your background in assessment as I talk with senior leadership teams in primary schools as I encourage them to build drama into the classroom. You bet. About that straight away. In fact, what criteria should we refer to when evaluating tasks with different sizes of groups in our classrooms? Sure. How do we reconcile a position as facilitators with the position of assessors? Well, all right, I'm going to dive in and then we'll see how we do as we go. If you want to continue adding ideas to this chart, by all means, go ahead and we'll refer back to them as we go. So the first thing that I want to say about assessment is that I say this very, very often and emphatically, you can't assess what you didn't teach. And when I say that statement, when I'm talking about assessment, I'm talking about assessment as kind of an accountability measure. I'm talking about assessment as a time where the teacher and student are partnering to measure, evaluate, get a sense of their growth and development over time. So that we had some questions or ideas that we're thinking about sort of drama work as sometimes it is spoken about as are we focusing on process? Are we focusing on product? Are we envisioning ourselves as a facilitator? What is our role? What does this look like? That with assessment, it's just an understanding that in the classroom, if teaching is happening, then learning should be happening, and that those two are connected to each other very deeply. And that assessment has always got to be focused on what it is that you and the students, what you've agreed is what you're working on, working towards, developing, etc. And in order to really get close to that, to figure out what I should be assessing, and then after what I should be assessing, how I should be assessing, we've got to be really clear about what it is that we're teaching, okay? And so depending on where you're joining us from, certainly there are many different models of drama curriculum and otherwise, and so I'll highlight just a few examples of that, just because I think it can help to ground us. That we just had that question about how do I sort of demonstrate to teachers who don't already have a drama program why having one might be important. Some of this might sort of get us in that direction. You know, that the conference is based in Scotland. So as part of the drama curriculum in Scotland, as part of the expressive arts in particular, there's an expectation that folks are going to be having access to the arts throughout their time as students. And what they've done with the curriculum in Scotland is, rather than saying in each grade level in each year as students are moving through their academic life, that they're going to learn these discrete bits of information, these parts of drama or otherwise. Instead, they're sort of giving general guidance overall what one should be accomplishing. So what's listed here in this chart as early, when students are before they're sort of starting their primary education. I have the freedom to choose and explore how I can use my voice, movement, and expression in role play and drama as a foundation. This is kind of what we're doing in drama. Going towards the upper end here, so what's listed here as third, which would be when students are in secondary school, I can create, develop, and sustain a realistic or stylized character through the use of voice, movement, and language. So this idea of character is introduced and new and different, but otherwise that we're creating, developing, and that we're using voice, movement, like that is not very different from what's being asked of the younger student. And the idea is that the teacher is then making decisions about what kind of content they want to focus on, and how they want to accomplish that based on the needs of their students, which is really great to have that flexibility and freedom. I am joining you from the United States, and we have a very different approach to drama, which is to say that in the United States, because there's 50 states and a variety of territories, we don't have a national curriculum at all. But there was a consortium of folks who came together to create some national standards, not just for theater, but for all of the arts, with the feeling that if there was not some statement of what art standards should look like, then there was the possibility that arts instruction might not be a part of curriculum in various places. So some 37 states and territories have adopted a version of the national standards in theater. There's a link here. You can look at it later if you're interested in finding out more specifically what it is that they're doing, or what we're doing, I guess, in theater, what folks are expected to do. But because it's non-compulsory, even though there are benchmarks for each year that students are in school, there's no guarantee that they've had drama before, and you get them when you get them, and they've either had drama experience before or they haven't. But whatever it is, it's all organized around these 4 artistic processes that students will be creating, performing, presenting, producing, responding, or connecting. So then just looking at one facet of these national standards with creating, here we have what's listed as pre-K, K, and 1. So that's sort of early primary school for us. That students are going to be, with prompting and support, transition between imagination and reality in dramatic play or guided drama experience. And that idea of a guided drama experience is this process-oriented drama work that much of you had some familiarity with and brought you here tonight, but could also be story drama or otherwise. My sense is a lot of teachers in the US will still do more traditional performance-based drama work because that's what their training has been in. And then they're using that idea as guided drama experience to be putting on a play kind of thing. But that's not necessarily what they were thinking about when they wrote this document. On the opposite end, when students are in secondary school, we're then moving into more performance-based language for sure. So staging appears here. But even at the highest levels, to synthesize knowledge from a variety of dramatic forms, theatrical conventions, technologies to create the visual composition of a drama or theater work. Well, what is a drama or theater work? And does it have to be a drama or theater product, or could it be something that we're engaged in and creating together? Teachers do have flexibility in terms of how they interpret that. And so as a result, there's a lot of variability for what happens in drama in the United States. Same time that the US was developing these standards, the UK was in a process of revising the national curriculum there. And so in some ways, drama was kind of removed from the curriculum, and in other ways kind of subsumed in English instruction. And so the one part of it that is kind of an expectation for all of the students is that they're going to have, as it says here, all pupils should be enabled to participate in and gain knowledge, skills, and understanding associated with the artistic practice of drama. And so to what extent and in what ways, again, is a little bit left up to the teacher and the school and what they decide. But there is some sense, at least with regards to spoken language in English instruction, that students should have opportunities to experience that. And there's other facets to how drama moves in and out of the English language arts curriculum as well in the UK. But this is the foundational one I think that's important to highlight. And so that's just to say that, like, there are many different aspects of drama work and many different thoughts about what students are meant to achieve, what their outcomes should be from participating in these experiences. On the flip side of that, of course, some folks are doing drama work not about learning about drama necessarily, but more about getting folks to learn about themselves and their world. And there are frameworks that folks could follow that might um, that might uh, the drama might lend itself to. So among them, there's a framework for social emotional learning, which talks about self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. And certainly doing all kinds of drama work, there are ways in which we could get students to learn about these different aspects of social emotional learning. Another framework is the 21st century skills, if you're familiar with that, which was created by the Applied Educational Systems, and they talk about critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and the rest, which are on the screen. And what they're doing with these 21st century skills is to say that irrespective of the content that students need to learn, whatever the subject matter, that there are certain skills that they should be developing while they're in school. And drama can be one of the ways that students might develop some of those skills. These, again, are like pre-existing frameworks that individual teachers might choose to or might be compelled to adhere to for their schools, depending on their system and what the educational authority is requiring of them. And then, of course, if you're working outside of that system, so if you're working in what we call in the US private schools, so where students are paying and the government not necessarily have a say about the curriculum that's happening in those settings, that they do have some autonomy, then teachers can have a lot of flexibility for what it is that they're trying to achieve through doing this drama work. And so what I want to do is just to get a sense of what is the drama work that you are engaged in, or that the teachers who you're working with are engaged in. And so that's back in that Google document. So just there's an opportunity to list some of the areas of drama that you might be focused on, just so that I can have a sense of what those things are. I'm posting the link to the document again, and it's just the second page. Well, I guess now it's the third page. What do we teach? So are you doing process-based drama work? Are you doing story drama? Do you do improvisation? What is the drama that you do? So if you want to add that into the chart, go ahead. And then we'll go on from there once we have a sense of that. Mantle of the expert is spoken into the space. I like it. Hope the music isn't distracting to you, but I do like to have, some underscore happening. It's an interesting experience for me. Mantle of the expert, the commission model, okay. So process drama to assist pupils learning and problem solving, sure. Awareness of form through use of conventions. I'm curious when you say awareness of form in what context? Theater form. Drama matrix. Okay. And John, I'm just going to ask you a context question, which is use of drama matrix. I'm not familiar with the drama matrix, so I don't know what that means.
You can unmute yourself, John, if you want.
Improvisation and adaptation. Okay, I've already read that. All right. So then the next question, always the next question. So if those are the kinds of things that you're teaching, or that you're observing that teachers, the folks that you're working with, that they're trying to achieve. So if that's the content that we're teaching, what are you hoping that students are going to get out of that? So in the next sheet here, we have, what do we want students to learn? And so here, just adding to the document, what are some examples of student objectives in the drama classroom? So what is it that you're hoping for students to get out of participating in that drama activity that you just described there, or that you just listed in the previous document? So if students are doing the drama matrix, what are they getting out of that? If they're doing Mantle of the Expert, what are you hoping for them to achieve as a result of having done that thing? So if you want to just grab one of these sentence starters and complete the phrase, you may. If this way of stating this as students will be able to does not appeal to you, and so you want to change that to something else, you could do that as well. So we have here, realize what they know and have learned, improve their multiple soft skills. Thank you. There was almost a slide in the presentation today that would have just been soft skills. I resisted the urge, but I was thinking about it, for instance, sure. Speaking English, you bet. Okay. And so using drama work as an opportunity for folks to practice spoken language. Realize what they know and have learned and share their understanding with others. Great. Assess themselves, their own strengths and needs. Okay, as I said before, if we want to continue to add ideas to the document, you can certainly return to it. But what I'm going to do is to go on to my provocation here, which is to say, not sure what's happening on my screen. And I don't know how to fix that. Okay. Provocation. We need clarity about what we're teaching. Then we can have clarity about what we expect students to learn. And now we can explore how to achieve that. And with regard to assessment in the drama classroom, how to measure, document, or track that learning. And the thing I have here at the bottom of the screen in bold, be explicit. So one of the things that is really sort of central to my orientation, both in terms of teaching, but also in terms of assessment, is that whatever it is that you are hoping that the young people will achieve by participating in this drama work, you've got to be able to articulate that, and you need to be able to share that with the young people. Now, there are some folks who I think would be morally opposed to the idea of starting drama work by telling folks, here's what we're focusing on, or here's what we're working on, because certainly giving them that information at the outset is going to frame the experience going forward. And I am well aware that that is what will undoubtedly happen if you are explicit with the students about what it is that we're working on or what we're hoping to achieve. I would counter that, though, by saying, if students have a sense of what our area of focus is, whether that's a specific aspect of drama learning that we want to focus on, whether that's some aspect of soft skills, whether that is that we're working to develop our spoken language skill or otherwise, it just makes it very clear what we're trying to accomplish, what we're trying to develop, and in what way we're trying to grow and learn. And then that way, as we're moving through the process, we don't necessarily have to have that idea at the front of our mind all the time, but it is something that we can check in about as we go. And it will be easier to do that if we know what we're working on. So that's to say, as we're doing drama work, we're moving through different conventions, we're having opportunities to have reflection as we move. And certainly, if we think about the work of Dorothy Heathcote, we know that there is always an interest in exploring reflection, both inside the world of the drama, what is happening for these characters as we're moving through this moment, but also from the outside. So for me, on the outside looking in, what is happening, what's changing, what's different, what's new? And again, here this idea, how does what we're doing right now connect to our overall overarching theme, idea, central question? It depends on how you frame it, you know? But the idea is that there are moments where we can be connecting to that overarching goal, objective, idea, and that students are doing that with us. It's not just me on the outside externally making a measure of where we are with that idea, but rather that students are thinking about that and having moments of that as well. So what I'm going to do is just to talk through a little bit of an example drama lesson that I did. I've done it many times over many years, but when you see, I've shared this PowerPoint with you and you'll have access to it. There's a link of a recording even of us doing it online, just because I have access to it. But what this work was, it was based on two books, one of which is called Waiting for the Biblioburo, and the other is called Biblioburo, True Story from Colombia. And just for context, so this makes sense to you, the theme or learning area for this lesson is, it was part of a curriculum that was about how children access books in different parts of the world. And so this was a language arts curriculum in New York City that was used for a while, that required students to look at one of those Biblioburo texts to see how children in Colombia were accessing books. Then they also used this text, My Librarian is a Camel, how books are brought to children around the world, and that's more of an informational text book, where you see like different countries as you're moving through the text and how children are accessing books, and some example of that. This other narrative text, The Librarian of Basra. So that was sort of generally the theme or learning area that was required for folks to do. The teacher who I was working with when we started creating this lesson, she wanted to incorporate drama, and so we talked about how we might do that. And if we were doing drama work, rather than just focusing on how children access books in different parts of the world, in this lesson in particular, we had this idea: students will be able to sustain their roles, listen and take turns, and expand upon elements in the pretext while participating in a role drama. And we had a question that was asked earlier, an idea that came up about assessment criteria. So in this particular lesson, we wanted folks to be able to sustain their role, so focusing on their use of voice and body throughout the activity. When they were in role, students appropriately listen and take turns, and then students incorporate elements from the books and appropriately expand upon them with a focus on inference. And so the idea of focusing on inference was something that came from their larger English language arts curriculum that was connected to and then adapted for the work we were doing in drama here. And certainly this idea of listening and taking turns is not just something that they're learning about in this specific lesson or unit, but rather something that they're working on throughout the year. But this idea of sustaining their roles, focusing on voice and body, because they hadn't done drama work very much before, this was going to be new. And so when I mentioned before this idea of being explicit about what it is that you want the students to be working on or learning about as they're moving through the experience, this is the kind of thing that I'm talking about. If we want students to be able to sustain their role in voice and body throughout particular conventions or particular activities, then that's something that we need to know that that's what we're trying to do. Because I may be able to do that, or I may be able to make progress doing that, but I will be better at it, or I will perhaps provide more evidence of that if I know that that's what I'm expected to do, and expected to be trying to do. So in the activity, the lesson rather, as we moved through um, some of the conventions that we used were a soundscape activity at the outset. This year, if we were outside at night on a hill behind a tree, what sounds might we hear? So one of the books, at the beginning of the book, it talks about this house on the side of the hill, fine. And so it's trying to sort of create the world with the young people. They're hearing different parts of, it's both of these books running concurrently, is the way that the lesson is structured. And part of it is telling the story of Luis Soriano, who was he was a man who lived in Colombia. It's based on a true story, and he had a collection of books. Knew that there were many children kind of in nearby towns, particularly in the rural countryside, who didn't have access to books or didn't have access to libraries, and so he decided to create a library of his own that he would then take on two donkeys, so biblioburro, Spanish translation, donkey library, and he would bring those books to the kids. So we start out sort of in the getting into the world of this part of Colombia. And so we're creating that with the young people through a soundscape activity. As they start to hear about the story, we're having opportunities to pause and reflect, which is not a convention I think that you would read in a text, different drama conventions, but it's one that I use just because it gives folks, for my students, a way of thinking about having reflection in a kind of formal way as they're starting to plan this work. So I tell them that pause and reflect is a convention that you can use where you're asking questions that are kind of like comprehension checks, but depends. In this case, because we're reading a book, it's definitely comprehension, but otherwise it can also be just sort of getting a clarity about how much that the students are understanding what's been happening in the narrative, or just what the particulars are, what the details are of the narrative that's unfolding. Do a roll on the wall activity when we learn about Anna, who is one of the characters in the other text, and she's a girl in one of these villages and she wants to read books, and she's waiting for the biblioburo to come so that she can get books from him. So we are introduced to her, and the students we had that idea of inference, so building on information that's in the text. Because these are children's books, there's not a whole lot of depth that's provided in the text itself. And so certainly, fleshing out these characters, building the world is really very much reliant upon the students and them tapping into their own creativity and imagination, and basing the what they create on those small bits of information that they gather from the text. And so when we did this work, this was working with teachers. We know that she has a rooster. She's a young girl living in the countryside with her family. She has responsibilities to help her family by taking care of her baby brother and doing chores on the farm. And she's most drawn to reading. So again, some of this from what we see in the text, because it's a picture book, some of it from what we see in the images, and then beyond that, what we created in the world. There are more conventions that we did as we moved through, but this is just to give you sort of a sense of how we're going. One point, there's a moment of overheard conversations. So Luis is having some challenges with his wife about what to do about the books and what's going to happen. And so we start to hear conversations between Luis and his best friend about what's been going on at home, what's happening with the books, what he's thinking. And at this point in the text, the students don't know that the library thing is going to happen later. So we're just sort of, again, trying to build the world at this point. We have other moments that go on. Eventually, there's a point where we see one of these towns that the biblioburro is going to come to. But before he arrives at the town, we're just introduced to the name of it, El Tormento, so the torment. So the town is called the Torment. What kind of town might that be like? And what might the children be like in a town that's called that? So then we have this moment where the students are able to sort of bring that town to life. And then we have some decisions to make. If Luis is going to come with the books, what is that going to mean? He's bringing these donkeys. What's going to happen with the donkeys? And in this experience that is recorded in the video, they decided that there needed to be rules for what the children would be able to do when Luis Soriano came to town. No damaging the books, no stealing, no throwing of the books, bring them back when you're done with them, treat the burros with respect, and the like. So overall, there's a variety of conventions that the students are engaged in so that they can get inside of these two stories about this biblioburo. And again, that we had that overarching theme. Students are learning about how children access books in the world. So this is giving them particular insight to what is happening with these folks in Colombia. And then in addition to that, we had our other criteria that we were focusing on there. So I just need to bring back up because I don't remember what they were. There they are. So students sustaining their role. So where are the moments where this role work is happening and how well are they doing that? While the students are in role, are they appropriately listening and taking turns? And certainly when we're having that structured improvisation of this town of El Tormento, oh my, that in that moment, listening and taking turns, what does that look like? And maybe, you know, depending on the characters in that moment of the drama, maybe at that moment, listening and taking turns isn't so important, but when we're having a conversation, then it is. So having some clarity about that. And the last year, students are incorporating elements from the books and appropriately expanding upon them, and certainly through all of the activities that we do, that's part of their work. So then to say, assessment. How am I assessing? When am I assessing? And what does that look like? And so not so much to speak about in this particular lesson, like what is the assessment and when is that happening? I think it will be helpful to be able to return back to elements of that as we talk through, but just to say that, you know, the hallmarks of assessment, whether in drama or out of drama, it doesn't make much of a difference. That most of our way of thinking about assessment is to say that there's three different types. Assessment that happens before the learning experience, diagnostic assessment, so determining the student's entry points, assessment that's happening during the reading, or during the learning, which is formative assessment, which I'm describing here as informal checks of student learning while a unit of study is going on or a lesson is happening, however it might be. And then summative assessment, which is usually thought to be happening after the learning experience, and often some kind of formal evaluation. And I put here of student growth, because we had questions earlier about if I'm a facilitator and I'm partnering with the students to engage in this drama work, what does that mean about my role as kind of an evaluator or an assessor? We had questions before that were about, you know, are there kind of predetermined learning outcomes that we're working towards or not? And in the arts, in drama, is that something that we want to be focused on? Or rather, is it just that we are growing and developing as artists, as humans? Depends on, you know, your way of thinking about this, what it is that you're trying to achieve with the young people. And so I say here a formal evaluation of student growth, just to differentiate that from like that they must all be proficient on the standard kind of thing, which might be one's orientation, but doesn't have to be. And even still, we can have summative assessment that is just targeting what has the growth been over this period of time that we're looking at. Now, I have much more that I can say about all of these things, and I have more slides that can give more detail about them, but I'm not sure what is most useful for all of you. So what I'm going to do is stop sharing and invite you to ask questions or to tell me what is useful, what is meaningful for you going forward. And certainly just having conversations about your work would be fine for us to do. Okay.
Well, thanks, Jonathan, for a really clear and engaging review of the issues. You know, it's really you've got me thinking. You've got me thinking a lot. For others as well. I think I always feel a bit of a fraud myself talking about assessment because as a practitioner who goes into a school and then comes out, I don't really worry about the assessment of the pupils. So I think it'd be good if we could open up to other people with questions and comments at this point, thoughts, their own experiences.
Sure.
Hi, Jonathan. Can I ask a question? Thank you
Sure.
so much for thank you so much for sharing it. It's very informative and very beneficial for me. And my question is, do you have a particular consideration on different age group for the assessment?
Sure.
Thank you
So
so much.
I think sometimes, well, uh, I know that there are different thoughts about, particularly for very young people, so in early primary school, that having assessment in the arts might not even be appropriate, that we should just be engaged in it and we're doing the thing and the students are getting out of it whatever they get out of it. And I just don't know that in drama, particularly that we had the question raised earlier about, how we're going to demonstrate to folks that having drama a part of the curriculum is important or worthwhile. That if there is no sense that there is something in particular that we want folks to get out of the experience or to be growing and developing in, then how are we going to support that this is a worthwhile thing for the folks to be doing? So to me, if we're in an academic setting of some kind, we're in a school setting, if we want, if we're going to be making the time for folks to be engaged in drama work, there has to be a reason why we're doing it. And whatever that is, so when I was showing the standards and benchmarks before, or we're doing the soft skills, whatever the reason is that you're doing this work for the folks, which could just be, I want them to develop their creativity, I want them to develop their imagination, whatever it is. I want them to know that their contributions are worthwhile and valued in this space, in this environment. That's okay. You need to know that. You need to be able to articulate that. And then what do the students need to know of it? Do they need to know that we want to be developing our creativity? Why not? Why is that a problem? Why would that be bad if that's what it is that we're focusing on? If it's something that is more sort of content driven, to say that we're going to be learning about characters, that characters have different point of view. Now, what the language is that you're going to use based on how old the folks are, I mean, obviously that will change, but the idea behind it wouldn't. If that's what we're working on, if we're working on conflict resolution, problem solving, whatever it might be, that letting the folks know this is what we're doing, and then to say that we're going to have assessment, what is that going to look like? We don't have to have a test, but that we're checking in. Okay, these characters were having some kind of conflict, or there was some sort of problem that was happening. Okay, how did we work through that for these characters in the drama experience that we had? All right, and then to make the connection. All right, what does that remind us of in our own lives, or in our own classroom, or in our neighborhood, etc., that we can then broaden out and make those connections for the folks. And maybe that's important to us to have that conversation, and maybe it's not, again, depending on what it is that you're trying to achieve. Lots of people have opinions about what we should be achieving in drama. I'm not interested in that. I was a public school teacher. I had to do what the state told me. So to me, rather, I'm able to work in whatever framework I need to be, and just that I want to have that clarity with the young people one way or another. And certainly whatever it is I'm trying to achieve with them, I want to have some sense for myself as a teacher, because it's going to inform what I do. Oh, that was crap. Thought we were working on developing our creativity, but that didn't really happen. So how am I going to do this differently in the next lesson? How am I going to do this differently next year, so that I'm not making not having the same challenges necessarily? And then for the young people, okay, so we were able to grow and develop in this way. All right, what do we want to do next? Is it up to the young people to make a decision about that? Am I inviting their voices and their perspectives into that, which I might do? Or am I in a framework where I don't have an opportunity to do that necessarily, but because I've got to move on to the next thing, because sometimes curriculum frameworks require us to do that. But at least it gives them a sense of where they are, why that experience was worthwhile. And if they're invested in that, I'm invested in that. We're all working together. And I think that that's really important.
Thanks so much for that sense of framework that you've offered us this evening, which I'm going to reflect on myself and follow through. And I thank Daniel what you were saying a moment ago about opening up so that the teachers can be assessed as well. I find that very useful. It seems to me that they're assessing us all the time anyway, the children. You know, there we are in the room, they're looking at us, seeing what we're like, seeing what we wear, seeing what we sound like, how we move, how we set the room out, what we brought in with us. Are we interesting? Have they, you know, whatever. And so therefore that business of, and I work a lot with younger children, finding a way of enabling them to share the assessment I'm doing with them. So I'm quite interested to see how, you know, how that might develop, Jonathan, in your work, and how you might go one stage further. Mine is a question like, what did you notice about what we were doing then? What did you notice about that group? What did you notice about me? And if there's an opportunity then, because I'm one of those people who goes into a school and hopes to stay for a while and then comes out again, over a shorter period of time, I've got a chance to refer back to almost doing a, on the smart board with my finger, what did you notice list that you can refer. I feel I'm answering my own question there, but what I'd like to put back to you is, can you develop Danielle's point in terms of your own practice at the moment?
Well, certainly. I mean, I think, you know, one of the ways that teacher enroll as a convention can sort of function is to sort of level the playing field between the teacher and the students, that like I can be enroll in the same way that you can, in the same way that modeling functions in education, no matter what the content area is. And so there to be able to say, not just like, what did you notice about what happened, but when we ask the question, of course, how might things be different? Okay, and we might do different conventions that allow folks to revisit or relive a moment from the drama, but in a different way, with a different perspective, with that new idea, kind of getting in the area of like how forum theater functions, certainly. And so to be able then to say to the student, not just like that you're assessing me, but also, of course, if you have a critique of how I've done it or how I've approached it, what might it look like for you to do it instead? And to be sort of elevating them to be able to say, I don't have all of the ideas, and we never do, but also that to empower them to be able to let their ideas impact a particular moment that we're focusing on, but also then further perhaps to impact the work as it's moving forward as well. Cecily O'Neill says all the time, I feel like, you know, when in doubt, if you're not sure what direction to take the drama in next, ask the students, kind of thing. And I think that certainly, you know, even if in planning a workshop or otherwise, that I'm always invested in what are, if it's the young people, if it's the teachers I'm working with, however, what are the things that they're interested in, invested with, and how am I going to be able to move and adjust what I've planned to do in order to better reflect and meet the interests and needs of the young people. And I think that just in asking folks that question at the outset of something and making it clear to them that that's what my orientation is, that's what I'm trying to accomplish, is to achieve what they want and what they need, as opposed to what I'm intending to do all the time. I think that just that that act in and of itself is trying to, in some ways, lower my status in this space and elevate theirs. John.
Thumbs up from John there. Yeah. Other comments? Siona, yes, come in.
I was just going to say thank you for that, Jonathan, and thank you, Danielle, for your contribution there. Because I think one thing that strikes me, because I'm out of all this really, and I'm not I have taught drama, but I don't teach it now. But it's, you know, I was just thinking about Heathcote's work and how she always, I suppose, repositioned the children. And it was, to me, it struck me about positioning, which I've been looking into for my research, I guess. And I was just thinking about when they're sitting having an exam, or they're doing it for an assessment that may be formal or informal, they're always doing it for somebody else, almost, you know what I mean? And that's probably a bit of a constraint, if I'm honest, in this sort of work. But I did like Danielle's suggestion about they're assessing me. I think that brings lots of transparency to it. And the important thing for me is it repositions the young people. I mean, I have worked with young people, marginalized young people, for a period of 2 years, where they were doing the commission model, which was Dorothy Heathcote's commission model. And I was in a fortunate position because they weren't doing an exam. It was like, they don't need to do an exam this year because they're at risk of NEET, or they're at risk of not succeeding. So in a way, they were assessed, if you want to use that word. I don't like that word very much, but they were kind of evaluated, or their work was, because they were doing something, making a film for the community. So there was constant feedback, but the positions they were in was very different, because here they were the people making the film. So it's just interesting listening to this session, even though I'm not directly involved in doing it. So I feel like a bit of a fraud, as David says. But it's just interesting to get that viewpoint, and I just realised how constraining it can be having to have assessment as such. But I think they get their feedback from the community very often in a more real sense in the work that I've been doing. So
we had the idea. We had the idea earlier, like of what it means for the person who's doing the assessing to be an evaluator, to be this like external person making a judgment on somebody else's work and what that's like. And I do want to be clear that it doesn't have to be that way. And I will say perhaps it shouldn't be that way. I mean, that the subhead of my book is a student-centered approach. And so finding ways for students to do peer assessment and certainly to do self-assessment is really vital. One of the things that I talk about in the text is when we're having this notion of a diagnostic assessment. So whether we're figuring out the group dynamics and the rest, or what the students already know about the content, but like, it doesn't just have to be me externally trying to figure that out, but rather for the young person to be able to say, look, here's where I'm at, and also to do their own goal setting, to say, this is what I need to be working on. This is what I want to achieve. And then for them to be checking in on their own work and their own selves about what growth and development they're making over time. Today, I was not engaged in the work and therefore I haven't done anything. Like, well, you need to be able to know that for yourself, okay? Because it's affecting you and what you're trying to achieve, because you established the goals for yourself. When I showed before what the criteria were for the Biblioburo experience, like that was the teacher creating criteria for this experience, but it doesn't have to be that, certainly. And so for the students, I mean, Danielle, that you said that we're going to be sharing with them that we're doing this assessment, it is also that we can construct the whole thing with the young people to be able to say, okay, where are we at? What is our foundation? Where are we starting from? And what are the things that we want to work on that are meaningful to us? And so then we're establishing our own criteria, and then we're able to check in on that. And then to speak of summative assessment at the end, to be doing the exam, what is that going to look like? Okay, how did you get here? What did you do? And what evidence can you point us to that's going to show? I mean, this is, I think this is part of the GCSE exam for drama in the UK, is that students have to do this evaluative paper where they're going to show the evidence of what they learn. That's part of where that comes from. If you're not familiar with that framework, could look it up. But just to say that it follows in this model that I'm describing, that the students are very much in charge of kind of both directing their learning as they're moving, but also that they're responsible for checking in. There is an external evaluation that happens, of course, but principally, as far as the young people are concerned, it's much more about them being able to reflect on their own work and development. And whether we're doing sort of traditional performative drama forms, we're doing process-based drama work, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Students can be sort of empowered in that way to be reflecting on their own growth and development over time.
When you did the Biblioburo then, and you had these assessment criteria, did you then explain these assessment criteria to the children before they started the work?
I did it when I was doing that work because I wasn't focusing on that at the time. So when we were developing the lesson originally, because that experience existed within this framework that the students were working on for the whole school year, how children access books across the world. They knew that going in, not so much the criteria, but sort of the overall sort of guiding objective. And so that we were going to be exploring this experience in this particular culture was kind of the driving force as we moved through the experience, rather than those criteria. That came later, certainly.
Okay. Yeah, it's, I know we've got to wrap up soon because it's coming to the time. But
didn't even notice.
What one of the things you're making me think about is the whole the balance within any drama work between the experience of the drama and the child or participant's awareness of being in that experience and helping to make it happen. You know, that phrase, I'm making it happen, it's happening to me.
Right.
So it's that balance. And I mean, I wonder one concern I might have is that if you introduce the criteria, that it might make people self-conscious. It might put this sort of cop in their head, oh, I've got to do this way because I'm being assessed on it. I mean, I'm just floating that. It's just something I'm thinking about at the moment as you're talking. Because, I mean, Dorothy had this wonderful distinction between self-consciousness and consciousness of self. That if drama, you are aware you're making it happen. But if it's self-conscious, then it becomes a negative thing, doesn't it? That you're feeling like you're controlling yourself, or there's a cop in your head that is. So that's a danger possibly in introducing the criteria to the children and explaining this is what we're assessing when you're doing it. Or do you think that's fair? Or maybe it's a question of how you phrase assessment criteria.
I think it is about the framing, but also I think it's about what is the kind of culture of learning and the culture of doing drama that we become accustomed to in an environment, and how we set that up. Because I think, you know, sometimes if people are engaged in this process-based work that's focused around these conventions, that part of it becomes like, how do we do the convention? What is hot seating? What does that mean? Who's the person? What are the questions that are asked? What's allowed in this framework? Okay, fine. Now we know hot seating. And we can do roll on the wall. What is that? And certainly, like, it fits within a frame of the narrative world that we're exploring, but there also is just the tangible, what is the convention and how do we do that thing? And how much time is it going to take me to give the instructions for the people to be able to do that thing if it's always a new convention that we're doing? It is all of a piece to me. And so if we're doing this work with regularity, then there's something about, you know, if our orientation is always grounded in what are we learning, and that there's a sense of that, not necessarily like that there's some specific outcome that we must be getting towards, but rather that we're in this process of developing or growing. And that is where we're living. That is the dialogue that we're always having. If we establish that as what the ethos is when the students come into this room, then the individual thing that we're doing on a given day, it will shift and change. But if we're always sort of oriented in that way, and it doesn't have to be so rigid in this idea of being self-conscious that I'm worried because I'm always being assessed. It could become that, but it just really depends on how you set that up in the group and how that you've kind of framed the experience, and that is going to then allow the students to be able to shift their perspective. You know, at what points am I in the world of the experience, and when am I able to just sort of step out and look back upon it, and what am I able to experience and articulate as a result of being able to move in and out of those frames.
Jonathan, you've given us a great survey of and a great framework for the whole field, and I think this is a really important discussion, and I'm really glad that you're having this book is coming out. I'm looking forward to that, because one of the things Dorothy talked about was very much we need, as teachers of drama, to be clear about what we are teaching, and that's coming through very much from what you're saying. That we need to be very strong and concrete and focused on that, and not woolly about it. I don't think she had much time for talk about imagination and creativity, because it tends to be a bit vague. We just think drama will do these things, yes, but okay, how is it doing it? And also, of course, she loved that quote from William Blake: if you want to do good to people, you must do it in minute particulars. And I think it was always that concrete detail of this is what we're looking at, this is what we're trying to do here, in minute details. And I think it seems to me that this work you're doing is helping us on that road. So thank you very much. I think we should wrap up, because I'd really like to carry on this, and we will carry on. We'll carry on with it in Aberdeen, on the cold shoulder of Scotland. We will be there next week, and we will carry it on in the future, I'm sure, because it's such an important discussion. And thank you for
looking forward to it.
Thank you for everyone who's contributed tonight, and see you all soon. See you all in Aberdeen, or maybe next year. Hopefully next year we'll be doing another conference. It will be in Manchester maybe next year. So thank you very much, everyone.